Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today we are talking about Ella Enchanted. The book is by Gail Carson Levine and was published in 1997, and I'm comparing it with the movie adaptation also called Ella Enchanted, which was directed by Tommy O'Haver and was released in 2004. And this won a book versus movie poll I posted on my Patreon account, and I was actually surprised it won because the theme was coming of age stories, and one of the options was Perks of Being a Wallflower, which I just kind of assumed that would be the winner. But Ella Enchanted ended up winning, so that was cool. And I will link to my Patreon down below, and if you want to become a member, that would be so amazing. Support the channel financially, and then you also get to take part in these bi-monthly book versus movie polls, as well as get exclusive video content every month. I also do book versus movie polls on my YouTube channel. I will have one in July. So if you subscribe to my channel, you can also take part. But if you're a Patreon and you're subscribed, you get to take part in a poll every single month. But yeah, I did read Ella Enchanted when I was in 7th grade, and then we watched the movie afterwards, which had just recently come out. But reading it this time around, I realized I remembered basically nothing about this book. I have seen the movie, a few times since then, and so I remembered the movie pretty well, and I was surprised at how different the book is. And to get right into the book review, so this book really is a retelling of the Cinderella story. The movie has like some similarities to Cinderella, but yeah, the book is just a retelling of that story, with the twist being that Ella has like the curse of obedience and she has to do whatever anyone tells her. And I thought Ella was just a very cute, funny, spunky, silly kid, and I thought she was very well written and very likable, and she just had a lot of personality about her while also just being very smart and kind and empathetic. And in the book, there's a lot of made-up languages. We have gnomes and ogres and giants and all these other, fantasy typed creatures. And something she does in the book is like she'll write out the language, like she'll have the dialogue written out and then in parentheses like say what it actually means. And I just wasn't feeling that. And at the end of the book, she gets into like this dictionary, like this English translation of these languages, because Gail Carson Levine went like really into these languages that she created. And she said she did that because she loved in Lord of the Rings how Tolkien would do that, how he created this new language. And I just have zero interest in that. So whenever she was having some conversation where it was spoken in a different language, it's just kind of like, okay, just show me the English because I don't care what this language sounds like personally. Same with like then when they have like, oh, I'm going to sing you a song from my native country, and then we get a song. Lord of the Rings does that too. And again, I'm just like, I don't care what their native songs are. As someone who isn't into fantasy and world building and things like that, like these little details, it's kind of lost on me because I just don't really care. But aside from that, I did really like this book, and it's a great one for kids to read. Honestly, as soon as your kid can read chapter books, I think this would be a good one for both boys and girls alike. And I do like stories that are a retelling of another story, and I thought it was well done. And it has a good message for children and adults. And moving on to the movie review, so I do have fond memories of watching this movie with my sister, and so I am partly biased, I will admit. But having said that, I do think this movie is genuinely funny, and we have solid performances. And yes, the plot details are very different from the book. However, the overall story and the theme and the messages, I think stays the same. And to me, that's what's the most important, right? But based on what Goodreads users have to say, I saw so many people leave a review for this and comparing it with the movie, telling people like, this is not like the movie is terrible, it did a horrible job adapting this, the book is so much better. So people who love the book and feel that way are going to be very upset probably hearing me say that I actually really like the movie, and that I think it is like a good adaptation despite all of the changes to the plot. And speaking of the plot, let's just get right into the plot details and what is different between book and movie, which means I will be getting into spoilers from here on out. So I'll begin with Ella's family. So Ella's mom dies when Ella is young, and her father is a merchant. And in the book, she like hardly sees her dad at all throughout her growing up years. And once her mom dies, it's like the first time she starts interacting with him. And he decides he wants to send her to finishing school. And so she had previously met Hattie and Olive. And so he knows they go to boarding school, finishing school. So he's like, once they go back to school, you're just going to go with them and start school. Whereas in the movie, she seems close to her dad, and it seems like she does love him. But even so, he is in very little of the movie. So in both book and movie, we just don't see too much of him, but in the book he is much more unlikable. And in both, the father becomes poor, and so he marries the mother of Hattie and Olive. So she has this evil stepmother and these two evil stepsisters, and Hattie finds out that Ella has to obey every command in both book and movie, and so she basically just torments Ella with making her do things, both at boarding school and then after the parents get married when they're living at home. And we learn in the book that fairies love to attend weddings and the birth of babies, and so Lucinda, the fairy who gave Ella the gift of obedience, she shows up at the marriage of Ella's father and this new woman, and she gives them the gift of eternal love. Even though they didn't love each other when they got married, now they do. However, deep down, the father still doesn't like being around this woman, and so after they're married, he leaves and he's like, I'm gonna go get our fortune back, and I'm just gonna love her from afar. And he basically is out of the picture throughout the rest of the book. And so once he's gone, the stepmother and the stepsisters send Ella to live in the servants' quarters and just make her be a maid for them. Whereas in the movie, the father marries the mother of Hattie and Olive, and he does go out to like get their fortune back. But then Ella ends up leaving, doing her own thing, and there is no boarding school. And so a big chunk of the book is her time at boarding school, and that's just totally left out. And then she's never a maid to her sisters, her stepsisters, because she just ends up doing her own thing pretty soon. And so that too, that Cinderella aspect of her being the maid is also not in the movie. And then to talk about the fairies, Lucinda and Mandy specifically. So Mandy is Ella's fairy godmother in both book and movie, but in the book, fairies actually don't want to be known by the public, and so they keep their identity a disguise, and so she doesn't know Mandy is a fairy until after her mother has died. And as far as fairies not wanting to be known, Lucinda is the exception in book and movie. She's just very out there and wants to be known, and she doesn't keep it a secret that she's a fairy, and she's constantly giving gifts that are terrible, but she thinks are a good thing. And so in the book, Mandy doesn't do much magic because she's keeping the fact that she's a fairy on the DL. But she also is too scared to do big magic because she's like, you know, I could stop it raining, but then that could have consequences. It could cause a drought or something. So she does very little magic that she thinks is safe and like will refuse to do anything more than that. Whereas in the movie, everybody knows Mandy's a fairy, but she's also just like not very good at it. So she casts spells, but they often go wrong in the movie. And then in the book, so part way through when Ella is a servant for her step family, Lucinda shows up and Mandy convinces Lucinda to be like, you know what? These gifts you give, you think they're so great, but they're actually terrible. And so you should experience them for yourself. That way you can see what you put people through. And two common gifts she does is one, she'll turn people into squirrels, which she thinks is a good thing. And so Lucinda herself turns herself into a squirrel and she lives that way for 3 months. And then for the next 3 months, she becomes a fairy again, and she gives herself the gift of obedience and has to do whatever anyone says. And after the 6 months, she returns to Mandy and she's like, wow, like, you're right. I give horrible gifts. Like the last 6 months have been terrible for me and I absolutely hated it. And I can't believe I did this to people. And so Ella shows up and she's like, great. So you realize how terrible it is. Now take it away from me and undo this spell you put me under. But now Lucinda is too scared to do big magic. And she's like, I'm so sorry. And I'll help you in other ways when you need me, but I can't do that big magic anymore, so you're just gonna have to figure things out on your own. And that never happens in the movie. Lucinda never experiences her own spells. But in both, when it is time to go to the ball in the book, Ella wants to go to the ball and she calls out to Lucinda to get her help. And Lucinda, she thinks it's small magic to like turn a pumpkin into a stagecoach, or a pumpkin, into a carriage, and then turn mice into horses. She considers that small magic. So she does that for Ella to go to the ball. And in the movie, she shows up just coincidentally and helps Ella get to the ball. Even though in the movie, Ella doesn't want to go, but Lucinda helps her get there regardless. And then also we have the giant's wedding, which she goes to in both book and movie. And in the movie, she shows up and she misses Lucinda. She like is too late to see her and she's like, dang it. Whereas in the book, she does see Lucinda there and she lies and says she's like someone else, but she tells her like, you gave me the gift of obedience, like, could you undo it? But at this point, Lucinda still thinks it's a good gift. And so instead she tells Ella like, be happy about this gift and be happy to obey people. And so for a section of the book, Ella is happy to obey people and it's like hoping someone gives her an order, that way she can be obedient. And at this point, her dad is trying to get her to marry this rich old man. And so Ella is like, yes, I will happily do that. And then her dad also makes her eat these mushrooms, which makes her like have loving feelings for this man. So she's being super flirty with him and just happy to obey orders. And it's not until Mandy, she's like, did Lucinda give you the curse of happiness? Like, did she put a spell on you? you? Or was it just an order? And turns out it was just an order. And so Mandy is like, okay, stop feeling happy about this. Feel whatever you actually feel. And Ella goes back to feeling her normal self. And then the mushrooms wear off. And so she's no longer in love with that guy. Plus, we find out the guy actually was not rich. And so the dad doesn't want her to marry him anyway. But speaking about falling in love and getting married, time to move on to Prince Charmont. So in the movie, Prince Char is like very famous and he even has a fan club. And he's also seems to not really care about being king. Like he's not really invested in it. And he just kind of goes along with whatever his Uncle Edgar thinks. And when Ella brings things to his attention, he's like, oh, I mean, like, talk to my uncle about it, whatever. And she's like, you're going to be king. Like you could actually make a difference. So you should care about these things. And so she kind of helps inspire him and wake him up in that way. But they definitely do have like an enemies to lovers start because Ella does not like Uncle Edgar and he has a lot of bad laws in place. And so she doesn't like him and therefore doesn't like Prince Char. So she's very cold to him at the start. However, through the course of the movie, she gets to know him and they end up falling in love. Whereas in the book, this is different because she meets Char at her mother's funeral because Ella's family was like, very rich and they mixed with the royal people. And so he was at her mother's funeral and he had known her mother and he really liked her. And so they bond at this funeral. And then from there, they like remain in contact. And then when she is a servant for her step family, he is in another country, like, living abroad for a year. And they write letters back and forth. And throughout this letter writing, at one point he writes to her being like, I love you and I want to marry you. And Ella is over the moon. She is so happy. But then she realizes like, wait a minute, Hattie knows that I have to do whatever anyone says. And eventually other people are going to find out too. And I will be a danger to Prince Char and to the entire kingdom. So she's like, even though I love him, like I can't marry him. Like that would be way too dangerous. And so she writes him a letter pretending she's Hattie, being like, oh, Ella never loved you. She read your letters out loud to us and we all laughed and made fun of you. And she also left last night because she went and married this rich old man and she never cared about you and all she cares about is money. And the letter just was very over the top and just kind of silly. And it seemed very extreme. So I thought that was kind of a silly part in the book. And she writes like, in the future, once I break the curse, I'll make him fall in love with me again. And it's like, if you're wanting to eventually fix this, then why did you have to be so extreme in this letter and just kind of silly? But anyway, in the movie, she writes him a letter too, because skipping ahead, she is told to kill Prince Char. So she writes him a letter being like, I can't be with you. I'm sorry. We can never be, trying to end things with him in the movie as well, but for a different reason. But to talk about the end and her breaking the curse. So yeah, Uncle Edgar turns out he's evil and he killed Prince Char's dad, but he blamed it on the ogres. And so he finds out Ella has to obey orders. And so he tells her to kill Prince Char at the coronation ball. And so we have this climactic moment where they're dancing and she's holding the knife, but then she resists the order to kill him and she drops the knife. And by resisting the order to kill him, she therefore breaks the curse. And she does end up being sent to prison for attempted murder, but basically in the end, everything is all good and they end up marrying each other. And Uncle Edgar, he accidentally poisons himself with the poison he had meant for Prince Char. And it doesn't kill him, but it makes him unable to rule the country. And so it's a, happily ever after in the end. Whereas in the book, so Prince Char, he returns from his year abroad and he is holding 3 balls, and Ella, even though she knows she can't marry him, she loves him and so she can't resist. She just really wants to go see him. So she still goes to the ball and she's wearing a mask and she, has the beautiful dresses and the pumpkin that is turned into a coach. And so she shows up at the balls and each of the 3 nights they dance and they talk and he is very taken with her but doesn't know who she is. But on the 3rd night, Hattie, her stepsister, removes the mask and so he sees it's Ella, but she runs off. However, she drops a glass slipper in the process. And she gets back home, puts on her servant clothes, and then Prince Char shows up with her shoe being like, I need to see if Ella is here. And he tries the shoe on Hattie and Olive. Of course, it doesn't fit. Then he tries it on Ella and he's like, it's you're Ella. And he's like, I love you and you need to marry me. And I think he says it like an order, like marry me. But Ella, again, she's thinking about how like, I can't do this. Like it's a danger to you and the country. And so she has this intense moment again. And she says, no, I won't marry you. And by saying no to him, she ends up breaking the curse, which then means that she can marry him. So in both, book, it's a happily ever after where she and Char get married. And then to mention some other changes from book to movie, so in both, Hattie tells Ella that she can no longer be friends with Arita, who is her best friend, and in the book she had known Arita at boarding school, and so Hattie tells her, like, you need to stop being friends with her, but Ella actually never has to do this because she ends up running away that night and avoiding having to say anything, whereas in the movie she does have to tell Arita, like, I can't be your friend anymore. And then, like I said, in the movie, Prince Charles' parents are both dead. The uncle killed his dad and then his mom just died naturally, whereas in the book both of his parents are still alive. And then also, speaking of ogres, so in both the ogres eat people, however in the book it seemed like the ogres were more evil and dangerous, whereas in the movie it seems like they are just like Uncle Edgar. Like, there's more politics going on in the movie too, where Uncle Edgar has these different laws in place prohibiting different types of creatures and people from doing things, and he's trying to get people to hate the ogres when really they're not that bad, even though they do eat people. But yeah, in the book, it seemed like the ogres like were bad. But in the book, there also wasn't all of these different politics going on because there was no evil Uncle Edgar and there was no one passing these cruel laws. So that whole aspect of the movie was not in the book. And then also in both, Ella is given a magic book from Mandy. And in the movie, the book is Mandy's boyfriend who she accidentally turned into a book. But she can tell the book, like, show me Lucinda, and she opens it up and she sees Lucinda. Whereas in the book, she has no control on what the book shows her. She just opens it up and it shows her whatever it thinks she needs to know. And in the book is not her Mandy's boyfriend. It's just, there is no boyfriend in the book. But moving on to book versus movie, so I can see why the movie made the changes it did, because, you have the boarding school aspect, but then after that, it is very much like Cinderella. And so I get that they didn't want to just tell a Cinderella story. They wanted it to actually be its own thing. And so the fact that they made those changes doesn't bother me. And like I said, I really enjoyed this movie, and there were multiple scenes that made me laugh out loud still all these years later. And while they're both cute and fun and enjoyable and have a good message about, Ella breaking the curse herself, and her whole life is spent having to do what other people tell her. And by the end of the book, she finds her own independence and she saves herself. So it's a great message in both book and movie. And so the fact that the movie keeps that message the same while changing the other aspects, it doesn't really bother me. And honestly, people who like the book might be upset by this, but I'm going to say that the movie wins. I preferred it of the two. I liked the actors a lot. I thought we got good performances, and it was funny and it was enjoyable, and it has some silly stuff, and you have the snake, the Carrie Elwes's snake, which was kind of random, but it's got some silly moments, but it's also meant to be just a silly fun kids movie. But as an adult, I still enjoyed it. So the movie wins here. I thought it was a good adaptation, even though it made some big changes. The theme and the message were still the same in my mind. So that is Ella Enchanted. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments if you agree, if you disagree. And did you read this for school like I did? We had it must have been a fairy tale section in 7th grade, because we also read Princess Bride. I don't remember what else. Maybe it was just those two. Meaning as far as the fairy tale stuff goes, it must have just been those two, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, fun memories of watching this movie with my sisters and watching it in school and stuff. And I do like Anne Hathaway. So yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe you would also like to watch another one. So I will link to a fitting video here and you can click on it if it interests you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.